Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're fascinated by modern military strategy and geopolitical power plays, hit that subscribe button for IntelX. We bring you the stories behind the headlines that shape our world. Now let's get into what happened in the skies over Estonia. The cockpit alarms erupted without warning. Two Swedish-built fighters had materialized from nowhere, their weapon systems achieving simultaneous lock on all three Russian aircraft. The targeting computers of the MiG-31 interceptors blazed crimson with warnings, each alert more urgent than the last. Every sensor screamed danger. This wasn't part of the plan, but the nightmare had only just begun. As the Russian aviators struggled to process the electronic ambush that had blindsided them, their threat detection system suddenly registered multiple additional contacts, high-priority targets closing fast. Out of seemingly empty sky, American F-35A stealth fighters revealed themselves. The Russian formation had stumbled into a carefully orchestrated digital snare, a trap so sophisticated they couldn't even comprehend the layers of deception surrounding them. What happened next would become the most catastrophic miscalculation these pilots would ever make, one that would reverberate far beyond their personal careers, sending shockwaves through Moscow's military establishment. The confidence before the fall, hours earlier, the scene had been entirely different. Three MiG-31 Foxhound interceptors roared off the tarmac at Chkalov Air Base, their powerful engines propelling them skyward with the kind of raw thrust that few aircraft in the world could match. Within minutes, they had reached their cruising altitude of 45,000 feet, a height at which they felt utterly untouchable. Their mission seemed routine, almost mundane, a standard territorial probe that had been executed countless times before. At the predetermined coordinates, the formation penetrated Estonian airspace, their transponders deliberately switched off, maintaining radio silence that could later be explained away as a simple navigational error. In their cramped cockpits, the pilots felt not tension, but boredom. This was just another day, another calculated provocation. Their flight profile had been carefully chosen to toy with NATO's response protocols. Flying in aggressive formation, they followed a route specifically designed to test Western patience, probe for weaknesses in the alliance's resolve. The Russian crews knew perfectly well that radar stations across the Baltic region were tracking their every move. That was part of the game. What they fundamentally misunderstood was the nature of the attention they were receiving. In their minds, the script was already written. Within minutes, they expected the familiar sequence. A stern radio warning, perhaps a pair of American F-16s scrambling from Lithuanian bases to provide the customary escort, and then a triumphant return to base where they'd be celebrated for yet another successful show of force. It was political theater they'd performed dozens of times. That's precisely why they were maintaining such a relatively low altitude for a MiG-31. At 45,000 feet, they were practically begging to be intercepted. They wanted the F-16s to find them. After all, the Foxhound's true performance envelope, Mach 2 and A3 and 82,000 feet operational ceiling, was far beyond what any F-16 could match. The American fighters couldn't operate effectively above 50,000 feet, which would have made the Russians' little game considerably less entertaining. Even if NATO's surface-to-air missile batteries could theoretically engage them, hitting a target traveling at the MiG-31's blistering speed at altitudes exceeding 25,000 meters would be extraordinarily difficult. This technological advantage was the foundation of their confidence, the source of their cockiness. It was also about to become completely irrelevant. The trap was already sprung. What the Russian pilots couldn't know, was that NATO's Combined Air Operations Center in Udem, Germany, had flagged their aircraft as high-priority targets from the very moment their wheels left the runway. But the orders issued that morning weren't the standard emergency scramble protocols. Instead, a directive went out that was remarkable for its calculated patience, its almost predatory restraint. Let them come, let them violate our airspace. This wasn't weakness, it was opportunity. And what followed would expose fundamental vulnerabilities in Russia's most advanced interceptor design. As the MiG formation pressed deeper into Estonian territory over the Gulf of Finland, north of Hiiumaa Island, each passing minute inflated the pilot's sense of invincibility. 5 minutes inside NATO airspace. 10 minutes. They exchanged jokes over encrypted channels, interpreting the silence from Western forces as fear, as capitulation. Their powerful Zaslan M passive electronically scanned array radars swept the airspace continuously, searching for threats. The displays showed only civilian aircraft and vast stretches of empty sky. Everything appeared clear. Everything appeared safe. They had no idea that while they were scanning for threats, they themselves had already been located, classified, tagged, and designated for engagement. While they thought they were flying alone through contested airspace, they were actually the unwitting guests of honor at an extraordinarily crowded and hostile gathering. The Invisible Hunters. Approximately 80 kilometers to the southwest, 2 aircraft had already taken flight from Amari Air Base in Estonia. These weren't just any fighters, they were Italian F-35A Lightning IIs, 5th-generation stealth platforms operating in their natural element. Flying in complete passive mode at significantly lower altitude, maintaining total electronic silence, they were essentially invisible to the older Russian systems. The stealth fighters' AN/APG-81 active electronically scanned array radars operated in low probability of intercept mode, a setting that made their emissions nearly impossible to detect. Every movement of the Russian formation, their speed, altitude, engine heat signatures, even the subtle variations in their flight path was being recorded with weapons-grade precision. Target files were being compiled that would allow engagement under any conditions. The MiG-31's radar warning receivers, based on older generation technology, remained completely silent. As far as the Russian aviators knew, they were flying alone in hostile territory, undetected and unchallenged. The F-35s weren't just tracking the Russian aircraft, they were conducting electronic reconnaissance on an unprecedented scale, operating like sophisticated vacuum systems, capturing every electromagnetic emission from the MiGs, every radar pulse, every data link transmission, every communication burst. Each frequency shift, each power fluctuation was being recorded and instantly relayed through AWACS aircraft to NATO intelligence centers for real-time analysis. This was nothing less than a complete dissection of Russia's most capable interceptor's electronic signature, information that would prove invaluable in any future conflict. The Swedish assassins. But the F-35s weren't alone. Several dozen kilometers to the west, 2 more aircraft were participating in this carefully choreographed operation. These were JAS-39 Gripen E fighters, Swedish-designed interceptors that represented something special in NATO's arsenal. Fed targeting data through Link 16 from the American stealth fighters, the Gripens flew a parallel course with their own radars powered down, electronically invisible. These weren't standard models, they were the most advanced variants Sweden had produced, and within aviation circles, there was an open secret about the Gripen's design philosophy. It had been created with one primary adversary in mind: Russian fighters and Russian air defense systems. The Gripen E's Raven ES-05 AESA radar, combined with its sophisticated electronic warfare suite and, most critically, its ability to utilize sensor data from every friendly platform in the network as if they were its own eyes, made it a uniquely dangerous opponent for Russian aircraft. Its mission profile was straightforward, but devastating. Electronically blind the enemy before they know you're there, prosecute the engagement using network data, and vanish if necessary. When the order came from the operations center, it was a single word that changed everything: engage. When the sky turned red, just as the Russian pilots were thinking this incursion was perhaps the easiest they'd ever flown, their entire world collapsed. The Zaslon M radar displays suddenly erupted with interference, false contacts, and meaningless data. For a brief moment, the pilots assumed they were experiencing equipment malfunction. Then their communication systems dissolved into static. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was electronic warfare. Seconds later, their radar warning receivers began screaming with an intensity and power signature they'd never encountered in training. Multiple radar locks from unknown sources. This was no malfunction. They were under attack. When they physically looked outside their canopies, searching for the source of the threat, they saw them. 2 JAS-39 Gripen fighters in climbing formation, their wingtips laden with the latest generation Meteor and Iris-T air-to-air missiles. Both Swedish aircraft had activated their fire control radars simultaneously, achieving lock on all 3 MiGs at once. Without even establishing visual contact first, the Gripens had systematically dismantled the Russian formation's electronic awareness using their advanced warfare systems. The MiG-31s had been rendered blind and deaf. By the time the Russian aviators spotted their adversaries, the Swedish fighters had already maneuvered into optimal firing positions and released their missile locks, a textbook tactical ambush. But then the situation deteriorated even further. As the Russian pilots reeled from the shock of the Gripen engagement, their threat displays lit up with additional contacts. The F-35s were revealing themselves. Now they weren't just electronically compromised, they were completely surrounded. The voice from hell, through the chaos, too. Gripen fighters calmly positioned themselves alongside the Russian formation, as casually as if this were a routine training exercise. The seeker heads of the Meteor missiles under their wings tracked the MiG-31s with mechanical precision. The Meteor represented a particular nightmare for the Russian aircraft. Traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 4, powered by ramjet engines that maintained thrust throughout most of their flight envelope, these missiles could catch anything in the sky. Then, cutting through the emergency frequency with crystalline clarity, came a Swedish pilot's voice. It was cold, professional, utterly devoid of emotion. Russian fighter aircraft, you have been operating in Estonian and NATO airspace for 12 minutes. Your electronic systems are under our control. Your radars are non-functional. Multiple weapons are locked onto your position. You have one option: return immediately to Russian airspace. This is not a warning, it is an order. For the Russian pilots, that moment represented the shattering of every assumption they'd carried into the mission. Their superior speed was meaningless. Their powerful radars might as well have been paperweights. Facing them was a force that had already defeated them electronically, trapped them tactically, and now dominated them physically. The formation leader understood the magnitude of the disaster unfolding around him. They were outnumbered, technologically outmatched, and catastrophically unprepared. When they attempted to contact their ground control, the only response they received was urgent and unambiguous. Turn back immediately. The retreat. 3 MiG-31 Foxhounds, among Russia's most advanced interceptors, turned sharply eastward like birds fleeing a predator. The Gripens shadowed them all the way to the border, ensuring they completely departed Estonian airspace. The F-35s, meanwhile, continued recording everything. The panicked maneuvers, the desperate communication attempts, following like invisible specters that couldn't be detected but could see everything. Not a single shot was fired during the entire operation, yet the is represented a defeat far more devastating than any kinetic engagement could have achieved. NATO hadn't just protected its airspace. In a 12-minute masterclass, the alliance had demonstrated exactly how helpless even an advanced Russian fighter becomes when confronted with modern network-centric warfare. The Russian pilots returned to base not with a mission accomplishment report, but with a sobering understanding of how fundamentally outmatched their technology and tactics truly were. The rules changed forever. After this incident, NATO made a fundamental policy shift. The next deliberate, aggressive violation of alliance airspace would be met with lethal force under predefined conditions. This decision had unanimous support from Estonia, Poland, Sweden, and Germany. Even President Trump made his position unambiguous. Well, I don't love it. I don't love it. I don't like it when that happens. Such rogue behavior should not be tolerated. They should be shot down if necessary. Which raises an important question. Could NATO actually shoot down a MiG-31 operating at maximum performance? The Foxhound's fatal flaws. On paper, the MiG-31's capabilities seem almost unstoppable. With a service ceiling exceeding 80,000 feet, roughly 25 kilometers, and speeds reaching Mach 283, it remains the fastest and highest flying operational fighter aircraft in the world. So how do you defeat such a target? The September 19th incident demonstrated one approach at lower altitude: advanced electronic warfare, network-centric data sharing, and the coordinated employment of 4th generation plus and 5th generation fighters rendered the MiG-31's speed advantage completely irrelevant. But what about at extreme altitude, in the thin atmosphere where the Foxhound was designed to dominate? The answer lies in understanding that the MiG-31's greatest strengths are simultaneously its most critical vulnerabilities. The Foxhound isn't a dogfighter. It's a massive, aerodynamically crude interceptor, essentially a missile platform designed to hunt American bombers by flying in straight lines at extraordinary speeds. At Mach 2.8 and 80,000 feet, this aircraft's turning radius measures in tens of kilometers. Any attempt at a sharp maneuver at that speed and altitude would either cause structural failure or engine flameout in the thin atmosphere. Simply put, it cannot generate the G-forces required to evade a modern air-to-air missile. It's a fast target, certainly, but also a target that can only fly straight. Furthermore, its infrared and radar signatures work against it. Physics is unforgiving. A fuselage cutting through the atmosphere at Mach 2.8 generates tremendous frictional heat. At these speeds, the MiG-31 becomes a blazing infrared beacon visible for hundreds of kilometers to modern electro-optical targeting systems like those on the F-35, or to the latest generation infrared-guided missiles like the AIM-9X Sidewinder or ASR-AM. On radar, such high velocity instantly distinguishes it from slower targets through Doppler shift. Concealment becomes impossible. Another critical weakness is electronic vulnerability. The September 19th operation proved conclusively that the MiG-31's electronic warfare and situational awareness systems are generations behind NATO standards. This disadvantage doesn't disappear at high altitude. The kill chain. With new engagement protocols in place, the next MiG-31 violation might not be an intelligence-gathering mission. It could be a kill mission. The systems NATO would employ rely not on individual platform capability, but on the lethal synergy of an integrated network. Consider the engagement sequence. A MiG-31 violates NATO airspace at maximum altitude and speed. It might appear invincible up there beyond the reach of conventional interceptors. But then a Gripen or Eurofighter Typhoon flying at 50 to 60,000 feet well below the Russian aircraft receives processed targeting data from an F-35 operating in stealth mode. The pilot doesn't need to see the target. The entire network sees it. The pilot simply pulls the trigger. The weapon that launches isn't a conventional air-to-air missile. It's the MBDA Meteor, and understanding this weapon is crucial to understanding why the MiG-31's altitude advantage has become obsolete. The Meteor utilizes both a solid fuel rocket motor and a ramjet engine. This means it uses atmospheric air to fuel its power plant throughout most of its flight, generating continuous thrust. After launch, the Meteor climbs steeply in what's called a loft maneuver, while a standard missile would exhaust its energy and decelerate during this climb to 80,000 feet. The Meteor's ramjet engine ignites at altitude and continues accelerating the missile past Mach 4. When the MiG-31 pilot finally receives missile warning, and it will be late because the Meteor's approach will be masked by the network's electronic warfare, they face two impossible choices: outrun it or outmaneuver it. At Mach 2A3, approximately 3,400 kilometers per hour, they cannot escape a ramjet-powered missile approaching at Mach 4 plus, roughly 4,900 kilometers per hour. The mathematics are brutal and unforgiving. Attempting to maneuver is equally futile. The Meteor maintains its energy and maneuverability throughout its flight envelope, while the MiG-31 at extreme altitude can barely turn without risking catastrophic structural failure. In a head-on engagement, a Meteor can successfully prosecute a target from 100 to 130 kilometers away. Even in the most challenging scenario, high-altitude rear-quarter engagement, with the MiG running away at maximum speed, the Meteor can still intercept from 30 to 50 kilometers. For the MiG-31, there is no escape zone, no sanctuary. The new reality, another option in NATO's arsenal, is the latest version of the AIM-120D AMRAAM. This missile poses an equally serious threat. With extended range, an advanced rocket motor, and two-way data link capability, the AIM-120D can receive targeting updates from F-35s or AWACS platforms even after launch. The rocket motor accelerates the missile to approximately Mach 4. Although it begins losing velocity toward the end of its flight, the overwhelming initial speed advantage rapidly closes the gap with a MiG-31 traveling at Mach 2.83. This forces the Russian pilot into defensive maneuvers that bleed speed and energy, making them progressively easier targets for follow-on missiles. In the operations room at UEDM, when the red icons representing the Russian formation finally crossed back out of Estonian airspace and headed east, there wasn't relief among the NATO controllers. There was quiet satisfaction. Russia's provocation hadn't merely been countered, it had been transformed into an invaluable intelligence opportunity. The critical Russian miscalculation was assuming that NATO's Baltic presence represented merely symbolic air policing, a political gesture with little real teeth. What they actually encountered was a sophisticated, lethal, integrated air defense system capable of coordinating different generations of fighter aircraft from multiple nations through a unified network with real-time data sharing. The paradigm shift. What occurred in Estonian airspace on September 19th wasn't simply a successful interception. It fundamentally transformed NATO's defensive posture in the Baltic region. In closed-door meetings following the incident, representatives from Estonia, Poland, and Sweden, the alliance's newest member, argued forcefully that the long-standing policy of polite escort had become counterproductive. Russia had learned to interpret restraint as weakness. Moscow understood NATO's rules of engagement intimately and had been systematically probing those limits for years without consequence. It was emphasized that while the September 19th operation demonstrated clear technological superiority, the next provocation could be far more dangerous. With Germany's support, a new and considerably more aggressive proposal emerged: the re-establishment of credible deterrence. This wasn't a declaration of war, it was a clear message about consequences. After intensive diplomatic and military consultations, agreement was reached on new engagement protocols. The question was no longer whether Russia would attempt another provocation, but whether NATO could and would actually stop them with lethal force if necessary. The final equation. Ultimately, NATO's capability represents more than technical superiority. It's a political message. The announcement of new engagement rules backed by demonstrable military capacity to enforce them fundamentally alters the deterrence equation. The era of consequence-free provocations has ended. The cost of the next deliberate violation might not be a diplomatic protest or a temporary media controversy. It could be the loss of strategic assets worth billions of dollars and the death of highly trained pilots who cannot be easily replaced. The risk-reward analysis now clearly favors the West. Russia has learned a hard lesson. The skies over NATO territory are no longer a playground for political theater. They are a battle space where mistakes carry lethal consequences. If you found this analysis compelling, make sure you're subscribed to IntelX. We bring you in-depth coverage of the military and geopolitical events that don't make mainstream headlines. Hit that like button, share this with anyone interested in modern warfare, and let us know in the comments what military topic you want us to cover next. Until next time, stay informed.